I stood in front of the mirror, staring at the man I had become. The reflection wasn't just of a man in his mid-30s, but of someone who had lost his way. The lines on my face told the story of grief, regret, and a deep-rooted sense of betrayal. But beyond that, they told the story of Stella, my first love, my first wife. I still remembered the day I lost her. It was a chilly autumn evening, and the sun had just dipped below the horizon, leaving a cold, gray twilight in its wake. The call came in the middle of dinner, the one I never answered. When I finally checked my phone, there were 5 missed calls and a single message that shattered my world: Stella's gone. Gone. The word echoed in my mind like a death knell. She had been in a car accident, one that the police said was unavoidable. But the truth is, I should have been there. Maybe if I had driven her, maybe if I hadn't been so wrapped up in work, maybe, just maybe, she'd still be here. The what-ifs haunted me every single day. It wasn't long after her death that Hazel entered my life. She was Stella's opposite in every way: bold, fiery, and unapologetically ambitious. She worked at the same law firm as me, and her presence was hard to ignore. While I was drowning in my grief, she pulled me to the surface, but it was never quite the breath of fresh air I needed. Hazel was a storm, not a savior. Our affair began in the office, late nights surrounded by case files and the dim glow of our computers. One moment I was a grieving widower, and the next, I was entangled in a web of passion and guilt. It wasn't long before I found myself standing in front of a judge, not for a case, but to take vows for the second time. Vows that tasted bitter in my mouth, not sweet like they should. Hazel and I tried to build a life together, but it was like constructing a house on sand. The foundation was never solid. It was built on lies, deceit, and the lingering ghost of Stella. Hazel noticed it too. She wasn't blind. She knew that my heart still belonged to another, even if that other was no longer alive. We had a son, Ethan. But even his innocent laughter couldn't bridge the growing chasm between Hazel and me. Every time I looked at Ethan, I felt a pang of doubt, a whisper that something wasn't right. Hazel brushed off my concerns, distracting me with work, with obligations, with anything that kept me from asking too many questions. And then it happened. During a visit to a small town where Hazel's aunt lived, I saw her, Stella. She was standing on the other side of the street, alive, breathing, her auburn hair catching the sunlight just as it used to. My heart nearly stopped. I wanted to call out, to run to her, but my legs were frozen, rooted to the spot. Hazel returned from the store, snapping me out of my daze, but the image of Stella lingered like a shadow. That night, as I lay next to Hazel, I couldn't sleep. The sight of Stella, or whoever she was, gnawed at me. I knew it wasn't possible. Stella was dead, buried, gone. But the doubt was there, festering in my mind, growing stronger with each passing hour. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know the truth. I quietly slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Hazel. I grabbed my car keys and drove to the cemetery where Stella was buried. The moon was high, casting an eerie glow over the gravestones. I stood in front of Stella's grave, my heart pounding. It was madness, what I was about to do, but I had to see for myself. With shaking hands, I began to dig, each shovel full of dirt pulling me deeper into a mix of dread and determination. When the shovel struck wood, I stopped, breathing heavily. I stared at the coffin, my hands trembling. I hesitated for a long moment, then finally pried open the lid. Inside, I didn't find a body. Instead, I found something far more shocking, a box filled with photos, letters, and mementos from our life together. But no Stella. She wasn't in there. She never had been. My heart raced as I stumbled back from the open grave, the eerie silence of the cemetery pressing in on me. My mind was reeling, trying to make sense of what I had just discovered. The coffin wasn't empty, but it was devoid of the one thing I had been expecting: Stella's body. Why? The question pounded in my head like a relentless drumbeat. I had seen her body before the funeral, hadn't I? But then, the memory was foggy, clouded by grief. The coffin had been closed, and I had never questioned it. I had been too lost in my sorrow, too consumed by guilt. Guilt, because the night Stella died, I had been with Hazel. I slumped against the side of the grave, the cold earth seeping through my clothes. How could I have been so blind, so foolish? But the question remained, if Stella wasn't buried here, where was she? I drove back home in a daze, my mind a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. Hazel was asleep when I returned, and for a moment, I stood by the bed, watching her. She looked peaceful, innocent even. But I knew now that there was nothing innocent about our marriage. It was built on lies, hers and mine. The next morning, I couldn't look at Hazel the same way. Every word she said, every smile she gave me, felt like a lie. I needed answers, and I needed them fast. The first step was to find Stella, or the woman who looked like her. But how? The town where I had seen her was small, and I didn't even know her name. Days passed, and I became more withdrawn, more distant. Hazel noticed, of course. She asked what was wrong, but I couldn't tell her. How could I explain that I had seen my dead wife walking the streets? She would think I was crazy, and maybe I was. But the truth was gnawing at me, demanding to be uncovered. Then, a breakthrough came. I was going through some old files in the attic, searching for anything that could give me a clue about Stella's death, when I found a letter. It was from Stella's mother, dated shortly after the funeral. The words were cryptic, filled with regret and sorrow, but there was one line that stood out: "Forgive me for what I had to do." It was the only way to keep her safe. Safe? Safe from what? Or from whom? My heart pounded as I reread the letter, my mind spinning with possibilities. Had Stella's death been staged? But why? And who had she needed protection from? Was it me? Or was it Hazel? The more I thought about it, the more the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. Hazel had always been so insistent on our marriage, so determined to erase Stella from my life. But why? Was it just jealousy? Or was there something more sinister at play? I needed to confront Hazel, but I knew I had to be careful. If she was hiding something, I couldn't let her know I was onto her. So I played along, pretending that everything was fine while secretly planning my next move. That evening, I told Hazel I was going out for drinks with some old friends from the firm. She barely looked up from her phone as she nodded, too engrossed in whatever she was reading to care. That suited me just fine. Instead of meeting friends, I drove back to the town where I had seen Stella. It was a small, quiet place, the kind of town where everyone knew everyone else. I parked my car near the candy shop where I had seen her, hoping against hope that she would appear again. Hours passed, and there was no sign of her. I was about to give up when a figure caught my eye, a woman with auburn hair, walking down the street. My breath caught in my throat. It was her. It had to be. I followed her at a distance, my heart pounding in my chest. She walked with a purpose, her steps quick and confident. She turned down a side street, and I hesitated for a moment before following. What if I was wrong? What if this wasn't Stella at all? But something deep inside me told me it was her, and I had to know for sure. She stopped in front of a small house, fumbling with her keys before unlocking the door and stepping inside. I waited a few minutes before approaching, my hands trembling as I reached for the doorbell. The door opened, and there she was, Stella, alive and breathing, staring at me with wide, shocked eyes. "Sam," she whispered, her voice filled with a mix of disbelief and fear. "What are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same thing," I replied, my voice hoarse. "You're supposed to be dead, Stella. What happened? Why did you leave me?" She looked down, her hands trembling. I had no choice. I had to protect you." "From what?" I demanded, stepping closer. "From Hazel?" Stella's eyes filled with tears, and she nodded slowly. "Yes, Sam. From Hazel. She's not who you think she is." Stella's words hung in the air like a thick fog, enveloping me in a cloud of disbelief. Hazel, my wife, the mother of my child, was not who I thought she was. My mind raced as I tried to process the bombshell that Stella had just dropped. What do you mean, she's not who I think she is? I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. Stella hesitated, her eyes searching mine for understanding. I never meant to leave you, Sam, she began, her voice trembling. I never wanted this, but Hazel. She forced my hand. She threatened me. My heart pounded as I stared at her, trying to make sense of what she was saying. Threatened you? Why? What did she want? Stella took a deep breath, as if steeling herself for what she was about to reveal. Hazel wanted you, Sam. She's been obsessed with you for years. Even before we were married, she was plotting to take you away from me. I shook my head, refusing to believe it. That's impossible. Hazel and we were just colleagues. There was nothing more until after you were gone. Because she made sure of that, Stella said, her voice firm. She manipulated everything, Sam. She made sure I was out of the picture so she could have you to herself. My mind reeled as I thought back to the days leading up to Stella's death. Hazel had been there, always by my side, offering comfort, support, and eventually, more. But had it all been a lie? A carefully orchestrated plan to get what she wanted? Stella, I said, my voice shaking, if what you're saying is true, why didn't you come to me? Why did you let me believe you were dead? Tears welled up in Stella's eyes as she looked away. I didn't have a choice. Hazel threatened to hurt you if I didn't disappear. She said she'd ruin your life, take everything from you, including Ethan. My breath caught in my throat. Ethan, my son. Or was he? The doubt that had been gnawing at me for years suddenly reared its ugly head. Ethan. I began, my voice trembling. Is he? He's not Hazel's, Stella said quietly, cutting me off. He's ours, Sam. He's our son. The room seemed to spin as the weight of her words crashed down on me. Ethan was mine, ours. And Hazel had known all along, had used him as a pawn in her twisted game. I felt a surge of anger, a white-hot rage that threatened to consume me. How could I have been so blind? How could I have let Hazel manipulate me, use me, deceive me? I have to go back, I said, my voice hard. I have to confront Hazel. No, Stella said quickly, grabbing my arm. You can't, Sam. She's dangerous. You don't know what she's capable of. I looked into her eyes, seeing the fear there, the same fear that had driven her to leave me, to fake her own death. But I couldn't let that fear control me. Not anymore. I can't let her get away with this, Stella, I said firmly. She's been lying to me for years. She's been lying to Ethan. I need to protect him. Stella's grip on my arm tightened. Sam, please. Let me handle this. I know how to deal with her. I shook my head. No, Stella. This is my fight. I won't let her hurt anyone else. Stella looked at me for a long moment, then finally nodded. Okay. But promise me you'll be careful. Hazel is more dangerous than you realize. I promise, I said, my voice filled with determination. I left Stella's house with a heavy heart, knowing that the confrontation with Hazel would be the most difficult battle of my life. But I had to do it. For Stella, for Ethan, and for myself. As I drove back home, my mind raced with the possible outcomes of the confrontation. How would Hazel react when she realized that I knew the truth? Would she try to deny it? Or would she show her true colors, revealing the darkness that Stella had warned me about? When I arrived home, Hazel was sitting in the living room, sipping a glass of wine. She looked up as I entered, a smile on her lips. But there was something in her eyes, a glint of suspicion, a hint of unease. Hey, she said casually. How was your night out? I didn't answer. Instead, I walked over to her, my eyes locked on hers. We need to talk, I said, my voice cold and hard. Hazel's smile faltered, and she set down her glass. What's wrong, Sam? You're scaring me. I stared at her, my heart pounding in my chest. I know the truth, Hazel. I know everything. For a moment, there was silence. Then Hazel's expression shifted, her eyes narrowing as a slow, Sinister smile spread across her lips. Well, she said, her voice dripping with malice. It seems you finally caught on. My blood ran cold as I realized that Stella had been right all along. Hazel wasn't just a manipulative woman, she was a monster. And now, I was trapped in her web, with no way out. But I wasn't going to let her win. Not this time. I'm leaving, I said firmly. And I'm taking Ethan with me. Hazel's smile vanished, replaced by a look of cold fury. You're not going anywhere, Sam. And neither is Ethan. I took a step back, my mind racing as I tried to think of a way to escape. But Hazel was quicker. She grabbed a letter opener from the table and pointed it at me, her eyes blazing with rage. You're mine, Sam, she hissed. You've always been mine. And I'll do whatever it takes to keep you. My heart pounded as I stared at the sharp blade in her hand. I had underestimated her, underestimated the depths of her obsession, her madness. But I wasn't going to let her win. I'm not yours, Hazel, I said, my voice steady. And I never will be. With that, I turned and ran, my heart pounding as I raced to Ethan's room. I could hear Hazel's footsteps behind me, but I didn't stop. I had to get to my son, had to protect him from the monster that Hazel had become. When I reached Ethan's room, I threw open the door and grabbed him from his bed. He stirred, his eyes opening in confusion. Dad? He mumbled, rubbing his eyes. What's going on? There's no time to explain, I said quickly, my voice trembling. We have to go. Now. I carried Ethan out of the room, my heart racing as I heard Hazel approaching. But just as we reached the front door, Hazel appeared, blocking our path. The letter opener gleamed in her hand, and her eyes were wild with fury. You're not taking him, she snarled. He's mine. Hazel, please, I begged, my voice cracking with desperation. Let us go. Don't do this. But Hazel's eyes were filled with madness, and I knew she wasn't going to let us leave without a fight. With a surge of adrenaline, I pushed past her, clutching Ethan tightly as I bolted out the door. I heard Hazel scream behind us, her voice filled with rage and desperation. But I didn't look back. I couldn't. I ran to the car, throwing open the door and shoving Ethan inside. As I fumbled with the keys, I saw Hazel running toward us, her face contorted with fury. But I managed to start the car just in time, peeling out of the driveway as Hazel screamed in frustration. As we sped down the dark, empty streets, my heart pounded in my chest. I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see Hazel chasing after us. But there was nothing, just darkness and the faint glow of the streetlights. Ethan was silent, his wide eyes filled with confusion and fear. I reached over and squeezed his hand, trying to reassure him. It's going to be okay, I said, though I wasn't sure if I was trying to convince him or myself. We're going to be okay. But as I drove through the night, one thought lingered in the back of my mind: Hazel wasn't going to let us go that easily. She was going to come after us, and when she did, there would be no more running. No more hiding. The final confrontation was inevitable. And when it came, I knew I would have to be ready to face the darkness that Hazel had brought into our lives. I just hoped that, when the time came, I would have the strength to do what needed to be done. If you like this story, please subscribe, like, click the bell, and leave a comment. Thank you in advance.